Now then, what we're going to finish up with, typically what we would do is kind of build the site, which we've already done with CSS and HTML. Again, I'm not going to touch this site anymore because there's really nothing that we can do with JavaScript right now that would change anything about anything. Like, there's nothing that we can really do right now with this site. I mean, we could do checks and whatever, but we're not focusing on JavaScript per se. JavaScript, as I've said before, should be utilized as a tool, not as the site itself. So you want to be careful with how much you use JavaScript. I will show you some tricks as we move along while we're doing what we're doing ultimately, which is building our own framework. But I wanted you to understand everything that goes into JavaScript, everything that goes into HTML, everything that goes into CSS. Again, there are little details that you can learn on your own, which I haven't shown you because I'm not trying to give you 500 videos of, okay, and here's the uppercase function, and here's it, because it doesn't matter. You can look all that stuff up when you need to. I want to show you how you can make it yourself, or I want to show you how the people that created JavaScript put it together themselves so you understand how to use it to your advantage. But the one thing that we're going to have to learn, and the one thing that I was going to teach you beforehand, and you might say, well, this seems kind of out of place, and you're right, it is, because this should have been one of the first things I taught you. Operators. Operators are very, very, very important. You cannot have anything without operators. We've kind of mentioned some of them. I have this star here, which equals multiplication. I have these commas here. I have this plus sign for concatenation. But there's really not going to be much typing, and there's not going to be really all that much explanation. Operators are how you can add things, multiply things, divide things, subtract things, how you can put things together, and how you can do comparisons. So let's do this quick because you don't really need to know it so much so. We'll get into doing it with the next programming language or the actual real programming language of all this. But typically, operators are this, and this. These are your operators. Plus, divided, subtract, star. There are other sort of connectors like commas, colons, semicolons. You have brackets. You have these brackets. You have the curly braces. You have regular brackets. You have equals, equals, not equals, less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. You have equals, you have not equals, and any ones I'm missing? There are probably a bunch. But anyway, so let's explain all of them. Plus is just adding numbers together, or adding strings together, or putting concatenation together. The servers and the compilers that you use in programming will see plus as adding things together, or adding numbers if you're doing integers or floats or whatever. That's what this is about. We're not getting into floats, integers, whatever, really, until we get to the next language, because we're not using that kind of stuff for JavaScript, more or less. And if we do, you would have already known it from the next one, so you don't need to worry about it in JavaScript because you'll figure it out when we get to the next one. And I go through this extensively. And it'll probably be one of the first things that we do. When you see divided, again, it's divided. That slash means divided. Typically, that's all it means. Subtract means subtract. Typically, that's all it means. But one thing you don't want to do in your naming conventions is you don't want to do something like this per se when you're naming variables and stuff. You can, but typically you would do something like this, or you would do something like this. Now, CSS is not a programming language, so don't say, well, in CSS we did, no. Classes, HTML and CSS classes, that doesn't mean anything. You're not subtracting or adding or whatever in CSS or HTML. We're talking about the programming languages, the functionality. This is how the functionality works. Multiplication, what we've done already, multiply numbers together. That's more or less what it's for. Comma, like this, separating arguments. That's pretty much what that's for. And it could be separating other things too, as you've seen with the JSON or with our object, we separate one identifier from another with commas. And as you saw, it freaked out because we forgot to put the comma here. You want to make sure that you separate everything with commas. It's kind of like talking to the computer. First name me, and last name me, and age. You know, you want to make sure it knows when to separate, because if you don't, it gives you error messages and it doesn't know what you're doing. So comma is like a separator. Colon is a means like this. It's a means to kind of tell the computer what the identifier is identifying. So it connects these things together. Your colon, as opposed to a semicolon, which separates things. So when you see a separator here, it's separating each functional line from the next. Get used to semicolons at the end of your lines, because when we get to the next programming languages, we're going to be doing a lot of semicolon separation. As you can see, brackets separate functions from one another. So it's like when you're writing and you put those brackets in there to connect all of these groups of things together. That's what you're doing. You're connecting these groups of things to one function. That's what the brackets are for. That's what these curly brackets are for. These brackets are more for like keeping smaller objects together, like arrays and stuff, so it knows a range of things in a certain variable or identifier or whatever. We're going to get into that more later. This equal sign gives something like this a value. So you see how we said that we want this inner HTML document, blah, 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 blah. We want this object to equal this value. You do a single equal sign. Two equal signs is a comparison. That would be more along the lines of, if you're doing like an if then else statement, if this equals that, if this has the same value as that, then do this, that, or the other thing. That's what this is for. This is a comparison. This is if it's not equal. So if you know anything about basic math, you know sometimes you want to do comparisons where two values are equal to one another. Sometimes you want to do a comparison where two values are not equal to one another. This is how the computer sees not equals. Less than, we're not doing elementary school geometry or arithmetic. You got to know what less than and greater than are. Less than equal to, same thing. These are comparisons. Now, this is when it gets a little funnier. When you do three equal signs in a row, which, folks, I never do. This means that it has to have the exact value in every way. Sometimes you can do comparisons between a float that doesn't have a decimal point or a zero, or if it does, but it's a decimal point and a zero, to an integer which doesn't have any decimal points or zero because it has the same value. 4.0 is the same as 4. This will say it's not equals to one another because 4.0 is not identical to 4. So three equal signs is, dude, it's got to be identical, or it's not going to work. And of course, this is, it doesn't have to be identical. It can work nonetheless. Really not a big deal. I mean, again, we're going to get deeper into it as we go into real man's programming language. I don't want to put it that way because I don't want to offend anybody. It's just a joke. Calm down. But this has been JavaScript, folks. When we come back, we're doing something completely different. Something that I enjoy. Something that I love. Something that is my bread and butter. My go-to. My right-hand man in all of web development. It's called PHP. And I don't want to hear any of you naysayers. I don't want to hear any of you people talking about how it's not any good anymore. When it comes to web development, it's PHP, and then it's everything else which sucks balls. And you're going to see why when we get into PHP and really start making this thing into something that you can interact with, something you can change, something you can have fun with. I will see you all then. So thank you for watching the series. Whoa, I didn't want that to pop up. Thank you for watching the series. We'll have more in a day. And we're going to have some fun. This is going to be great. I'll see you then.